Hey guys, Zepha here. Today I'm in the Blended Grove in Selenopolis, and I'm so excited to announce that I have some exclusive teasers straight from KingsIsle for the 2025 Spring Update with 3 brand new rank 4 Stormweaving spells to share. So let's dive right in with our first spell, Floodblade, which allows Storm Wizards weaving into life to get 45% Storm and Life Blades for 2 pips. This is basically the opposite of the Energy Blade spell for Life Wizards weaving into Storm, and based on previous teasers we've already seen this week, like Ghost Blade and Creation Blade for Deaths and Myths weaving into Life, it looks like at least several schools can expect to get new blade options through Life weaving this update, which is pretty cool. Before now, Storm and Balance had the only blade options available, with most PvE players especially choosing to weave into Storm for the stackable blades, since you can enchant them for both an extra 45 and 55% blade. Before Floodblade, Storm Wizards had Tornado Blade from Balance Weaving as their only blade utility option since they can't weave into their native school, so it's great to have another alternative available with higher percentages. By weaving into life, Storm Wizards will also get access to Green Serpent at rank 2, which deals life damage and removes up to 3 traps from the caster to apply negative 20% weaknesses to the target, and Flood Amplify at rank 3, which further boosts Storm and life damage, so that coupled with the new blade may turn life into a solid weaving option. Moving on to our second new spell, we have Shivering Snake for Storm Wizards weaving into ice. This 3-pip spell does 330 ice damage, then clears the target's aura for a 30% Storm Blade, and it requires fusing Thunder Snake and Thieving Dragon together. And I did not get an animation teaser for this particular spell, so I assume it looks similar to the existing Frost Snake spell treasure card you can see here. So looking at the Path B upgrades for both Thunder Snake and Thieving Dragon, we can see that Shivering Snake takes the ice damage and aura clear from Thieving Dragon, and the blade from Thunder Snake, so it basically becomes a cheaper and more offensive version of the regular Thieving Dragon spell. I could see this having some niche use in PvE as a relatively inexpensive way to break shields or remove weaknesses with the ice damage while removing the helpful aura from an enemy to give you a Storm Blade to buff up for a stronger Storm hit later, but like many of the previous fusion spells we've seen, I'm not sure if PvE players will find regular use for it, at least not in the majority of fights. For PvP, it obviously gives Storm Wizards easier access to clear auras, which is a utility Storm doesn't usually get from their native spells, but I'm not sure how desirable that will be compared to other weaving options currently on the table, so definitely comment below if you think this spell is worth it or not. When weaving into ice, Storm also gets Chillzilla at rank 1 for 5 pips, which deals ice damage, then removes up to 2 damage over time effects from the caster to apply up to 2 negative 40% shields of the target's school on the caster, which obviously gives some more defensive value. And then at rank 3, you also get the Hail Trap for 1 pip, which gives 40% Storm and Ice traps, which can be enchanted and stacked for some 50% traps as well, with Myth being the only other weaving school that offers traps for Storm, so it'll be interesting to see if players find enough value in ice weaving as a whole to invest in it. Finally, we have the Sand Monster for Storm Wizards weaving into Balance. This 2-pip spell does 250 balance damage and gives the caster 40% Storm Blade if the target has a heal over time on them, and it requires fusing Triton and Gearhead Destroyer together. You can see the new animation looks pretty similar to the original Triton spell, but with some cool reddish tones instead of the usual purple. Looking at the Path B upgrades for Triton and Gearhead Destroyer, it appears that Sand Monster takes the blade utility from Triton and the heal over time from both Triton and Gearhead Destroyer, though it's interesting that it neither clears nor swaps the heal over time like the original spells, but maybe that accounts for the fact that it's only 2 pips. Considering the low damage and pip cost, I could see this being used to cheaply remove some shields or weaknesses with the balance damage, and then the Storm Blade helping to buff yourself for a future Storm attack, but just note that this does not remove the heal over time on the enemy. The low pip cost in particular helps make it a bit more viable as a PvE utility spell, though still somewhat niche, and for PvP I think it'll be more a question of if balance weaving as a whole is worth investing in, considering Storm already has a number of options for taking advantage of heal over times and blades with their existing spell gambits. When weaving into Balance, Storm Wizards will also get the spell King of Order at rank 1 for 4 pips, which deals 370 split balance damage among selected enemies and applies 2 60% Storm damage blades on the caster if the caster has a damage over time effect active. Then at rank 3, they get the previously mentioned Tornado Blade, which gives 35% Storm and Balance Blades for 1 pip. And since some people get confused here, the Balance Blade here is balance school damage, not universal damage. And side note for any devs listening, I do think it might be helpful to have the Balance Blade stand out a bit more visually compared to universal blades, because I see many players misunderstanding this distinction quite often, so just a suggestion. Obviously, before the new Floodblade spell, the Tornado Blade was Storm's only blade utility option for any of the weaving schools, so it'll be interesting to see whether life or balance weaving might be more appealing now, especially for any PvE players. King of Order is also the only selected target pseudo AoE spell that Storm Wizards have access to via weaving, besides the Mythic Mermaids at rank 3 myth weaving, so I wonder if that might also appeal to some players. On that note, I've seen a lot of people get confused about divided versus selected damage when it comes to a lot of the newer spells, so I do want to quickly clarify here. When we got the original level 118 Mirage Shadow spells, they had something called divided damage, where unlike a regular AoE that automatically hits all the enemies for the same amount of damage as indicated on the card, you could instead select how many targets you wanted to hit, with the trade-off being that for each target you selected, the original damage of the spell would be divided by that number, with the damage then being equally applied to each enemy. So, for instance, if you hit one target with Iron Sultan, it would do the full 1092 damage to that one target. But if you chose to hit 2 enemies, the damage would be halved to 546 damage to each target instead, and at 4 enemies, the spell would only do a very small 273 damage each. However, the devs have since changed how these spells work, so now instead of divided damage, most bottom path AoE spells are selected target and the damage is now calculated differently. Instead of taking the original damage and dividing it by the number of targets, the selected target spells lose roughly 25% of their damage value with each additional enemy selected instead of half. So, as you can see in this example, 75% of 405 damage is 303 damage when 2 enemies are selected, and it's rounded up to 305. And then 75% of 303 damage is then 227 damage when 3 enemies are selected, rounded up to 230 in this case. So while there is still some damage fall off for picking multiple targets, it's not as dramatic as the original divided damage spells, making it a lot more viable for attacking multiple enemies. To keep it really simple, selected target spells give you more damage than divided damage spells do. Based on previous teasers we've seen this week of new spellment paths for those old level 118 shadow spells, it appears that the devs are transitioning all the divided damage spells to selected target, so everything will finally be more standardized, though none of these changes currently affect the regular AoE spells. But I'll be interested to see if we ever get any traditional AoE spells as spell weaving options. I will say that I am personally most excited for the Floodblade, since up until now I sort of felt forced into weaving into balance for the blade utility as a PvE player, and I can't wait to see what other weaving spells the devs have in the pipeline, especially more utility options, since right now those seem to have the most direct benefit in most PvE fights. For instance, other potential new spells I've seen many players request for future weaving ranks include Triage, Pierce, or Shatter weaving alternatives, mass traps like Fuel for weaving into fire, or mass shields for weaving into ice. I'm very interested to hear both PvE and PvP players' thoughts on all these new spells and their viability in various scenarios, so definitely comment below if you think any of them are worth it for Storm Wizards, and if these new options are making you consider swapping your weaving school. Thanks so much again to KingsIsle, all the devs, and our lovely community manager Emma for the opportunity to tease these spells, and we'll continue to have teasers the rest of this week, so definitely make sure to tune in to all these other amazing content creators. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really does help me to make more amazing Wiz content for you all. And if you want to support me and the channel further, you can hit the join button below to become one of my awesome channel members. As always, I hope to see you out there in the spiral, and happy questing.